She rode into Apache land to trade, and returned with a mark no soldier would dare cross. Before starting this story, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your help. If you enjoy the stories we share, please help the channel reach the goal of 1,000 subscribers. I'd be very happy if you could subscribe. Without further delay, let's dive into this emotional story. The dust kicked up by Sarah Mackenzie's horse settled slowly in the scorching Arizona heat as she approached the trading post at Skeleton Canyon. Her father's words echoed in her mind. The Apache raids have cost us 3 supply runs this month. Someone needs to make direct contact, negotiate a passage agreement. What he hadn't said, but she understood, was that someone couldn't be him, not with his reputation for sharp dealing that had already soured relations with several tribes. Sarah adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and checked the goods secured to her. Pack mule, blankets, metal tools, coffee, and sugar. Items she knew the Apache valued. Unlike the military supplies that usually pass through this territory, her cargo represented survival, not warfare. The distinction mattered more than most settlers realized. The trading post's proprietor, a weathered man named Garrett, emerged from the shade as she dismounted. "Miss Mackenzie, your father's lost his mind sending you out here alone. The Chiricahua have been moving through these parts regular-like. Yesterday they took down a supply wagon just 20 miles north. That's exactly why I'm here, Mr. Garrett." Sarah tied her horse to the hitching post with practiced efficiency. Those weren't random attacks. They're protecting something, or someone's pushed them into a corner. Either way, continuing to fight them isn't working. Garrett spat into the dust. "You talk like they're reasonable people. These are Apache, girl. They don't negotiate. They take what they want and kill the rest." Sarah had heard this rhetoric her entire life, growing up in Tucson as the daughter of one of the territory's largest merchants. But she'd also heard the other stories, whispered accounts from Mexican traders who spoke of Apache honor codes, of their deep knowledge of the desert, of agreements that held for decades when both sides respected the terms. "I'm not going in unprepared," she said, pulling a folded paper from her saddlebag. "I've been studying their language with Father Martinez. He lived among them for 2 years after they took him prisoner, and he learned their customs. He says, there's a protocol for approaching them peacefully." The old trader examined the notes, his eyebrows rising. "This is more than most soldiers know about Apache ways, but knowing their words and understanding their minds are different things entirely." Sarah shouldered her rifle and checked her water supply. The real challenge wasn't the language barrier or even the physical danger. It was overcoming decades of mutual mistrust built on broken promises and bloodshed from both sides. But her family's business depended on establishing a reliable trade route through Apache territory, and the traditional approach of military escorts had only escalated the conflict. As she prepared to leave the relative safety of the trading post, Sarah thought about her mother's parting words. "Your father sees profit in this venture, but I see only danger. Promise me you'll remember that survival matters more than success." Now, with the vast expanse of desert ahead and the knowledge that Apache scouts were likely already watching her approach, Sarah understood her mother's fear. But she also understood that some risks were worth taking, especially when the alternative was continued violence that served no one's interests. 3 days into Apache territory, Sarah's careful planning met its first real test. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountain peaks when she spotted the dust cloud approaching from the northeast, riders moving with the kind of precision that meant they weren't lost travelers or wandering cattle. She reined in her horse and waited, her heart hammering against her ribs despite her outward calm. The Apache warriors emerged from the heat shimmer like apparitions made flesh, 5 men on horseback, their faces painted with ochre and their rifles held with casual confidence. Sarah raised her right hand in the greeting Father Martinez had taught her, speaking in halting Apache. "I come in peace, seeking words with your leaders about trade." The lead warrior, a man whose scarred face spoke of many battles, studied her for a long moment before responding in clear English. "I am Naiche. You speak our tongue poorly, but your words are not those of soldiers or settlers. Why does a woman ride alone into our lands? Sarah dismounted slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "I am Sarah Mackenzie. My family trades goods throughout this territory. The fighting between your people and mine serves no one well. I come hoping to find a path that benefits both." Nietzsche's warriors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and Sarah could hear the soft jingle of their horses' bridles as they shifted restlessly. She had studied Apache customs, but standing before these men, she realized how little book learning could prepare her for the reality of this encounter. "Your soldiers promise peace with one tongue and prepare war with another," Nietzsche said. "Your merchants trade fairly with some and cheat others. Why should we trust the daughter of traders when the sons of soldiers have broken their word so many times?" The question cut straight to the heart of the matter. Sarah had anticipated it, but having a prepared answer and delivering it convincingly were different challenges entirely. "Because I offer something different. Not promises from distant men in Washington, but direct agreements between people who both need safe passage through these lands." She gestured toward her pack mule. "I brought goods as a sign of respect, not as payment for passage. Coffee, wool blankets, iron tools, things that might be useful to your people. But more than that, I bring a proposal. Regular trade at fair prices, and safe passage for both Apache and merchant caravans along agreed routes." Nietzsche dismounted and approached her pack mule, examining the goods with the eye of someone who understood their value. His warriors remained mounted but relaxed slightly, their rifles no longer pointed in her direction. "These are quality goods," he admitted. "Not the inferior items the army trades, but talk is easy. Actions prove intentions." "Then let me prove mine," Sarah replied. "I propose to stay among your people for 7 days. Let me learn your needs and concerns firsthand. Let your leaders judge whether I speak truth or merely repeat the empty words of others." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Sarah knew she had just made an offer that could cost her life if she had misjudged these men's character. But she also knew that half measures would accomplish nothing in this situation. Finally, Nietzsche nodded. 7 days. You will be under the protection of my word, but you will also be watched constantly. If you prove treacherous, you will not leave our lands alive. If you prove honest, perhaps we can find this path you speak of." The Apache camp nestled against red stone cliffs that caught and held the desert's heat long after sunset. Sarah had expected a temporary settlement, but the careful arrangement of wickiups and the established fire rings spoke of a community that had occupied this site for months, possibly longer. Children played between the dwellings while women tended cooking fires, and the normalcy of the scene struck her as profoundly different from the savage raiders described in newspaper accounts. Nietzsche led her to an elderly woman whose weathered hands spoke of decades of hard work. "This is Lozen's grandmother, Kachina. She will decide where you sleep and what work you do. Among our people, guests earn their place through contribution, not merely presence." Kachina examined Sarah with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The calluses on her hands, the quality of her boots, the way she carried herself. After a moment, she spoke in rapid Apache to Nietzsche, who translated, "She says you have the look of someone who knows work, not just the talk of it. You will help with the evening meal preparation and learn our ways properly." The next several days blurred together in a rhythm Sarah had never experienced. She learned to gather desert plants for food and medicine, to repair gear with materials available in the wilderness, and to read the subtle signs that warned of weather changes in the high desert. The work was demanding, but it came with conversations that gradually revealed the Apache perspective on the ongoing conflict. "Your people see only what they want to take," explained Deheste, a young woman near Sarah's age whose husband had been killed in a cavalry raid the previous year. "They look at our lands and see cattle ranches, mining claims, railroad routes. They don't see the sacred places, the seasonal camps, the hunting grounds that have sustained our families for generations." Sarah learned that the Apache raids weren't random acts of violence, but strategic responses to specific provocations. Military patrols that destroyed water sources, miners who desecrated burial grounds, ranchers who blocked traditional travel, routes. Each attack had a context that made sense within Apache cultural framework, even if that context was invisible to most white settlers. On the fourth day, she participated in a trading session with Mexican merchants who arrived with trains loaded with goods. The negotiations were complex, involving not just immediate exchanges but long-term agreements about passage rights and mutual protection. Sarah watched Nietzsche and the other leaders balance the needs of their people against the realities of dealing with increasingly encroaching settlement. "You see how we actually conduct business," Nietzsche told her afterward. "Not the savage raids your newspapers describe, but careful negotiations that consider all parties' interests. The problem is that your government representatives rarely have the authority to make binding agreements, and your military commanders change every few years, bringing new policies that ignore previous understandings." That evening, as Sarah sat beside the fire repairing a bridle that had been damaged during the day's work, Kachina approached with a small bundle. Inside was a necklace of polished stones and silver beads, clearly a piece of significant value and craftsmanship. "She says this belonged to her daughter, who died of the white man's spotted sickness 2 winters ago," Nietzsche translated. "She wants you to wear it as a sign that you have been accepted among our people. But she also wants you to understand that acceptance brings responsibilities. When you return to your people, you will speak for us as we have spoken for you." Sarah accepted the necklace with hands that trembled slightly. The weight of it around her neck felt like far more than metal and stone. It was a tangible connection to a community that had chosen to trust her despite every reason for suspicion. As she looked around the circle of faces illuminated by firelight, she realized that her original plan to negotiate a simple trade agreement had evolved into something far more complex and consequential. Before continuing with the story, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your help. If you're enjoying this story, please help the channel reach the goal of 1,000 subscribers. I'd truly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Now, back to the story. The morning of Sarah's planned departure, word arrived that changed everything. A young Apache scout rode into camp with news that a military patrol was approaching from the south. Not the usual frontier cavalry, but a column of soldiers with wagons and what appeared to be surveying equipment. The camp's atmosphere shifted. Immediately from the relaxed routine, Sarah had grown accustomed to an urgency that spoke of practiced responses to familiar threats. "They're not pursuing you," Nietzsche assured her as he studied the scout's report. "But they're heading directly toward our winter camps in the mountains. If they're surveying for a new fort or railroad route, this could force us to abandon territory we've held for 3 generations." Sarah found herself facing a choice she hadn't anticipated. She could continue with her original plan, return to Tucson with the trading agreements she'd negotiated, and let others deal with this new military development. Or she could use her unique position as someone trusted by both sides to attempt something more ambitious and dangerous. "What if I rode out to meet them?" she asked. "Not as an Apache messenger, but as a merchant who's been conducting legitimate business in the territory. I could assess their intentions and perhaps influence their approach." The suggestion sparked immediate debate among the Apache leaders. Some saw it as an unnecessary risk that could compromise their defensive positions. Others recognized it as a potential opportunity to avoid conflict through information gathering. Finally, Lozin herself, the legendary woman warrior whose strategic wisdom was respected throughout Apache territory, spoke the words that settled the matter. "The trading woman has earned the right to make this choice," Nietzsche translated. "If she wishes to carry our words to these soldiers, she does so with our trust. But she should understand that once she speaks for us, she can never return to being merely a neutral merchant." Sarah rode out to intercept the military column with Kachina's necklace clearly visible against her shirt, and her understanding of the situation forever changed. The officer in command, a young lieutenant named Crawford, initially dismissed her. as a civilian who had strayed into a military operation. But when she began describing the Apache camp's defensive capabilities and the specific reasons for their current location, his attitude shifted to respectful attention. "Ma'am, you're saying you've been living among hostiles for nearly a week, and they just let you ride out to warn us?" "I'm saying I've been staying with people who are trying to protect their families and their way of life," Sarah corrected. "They're not planning attacks on settlements or travelers. They're trying to avoid a confrontation that will serve no one's interests." The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours and covered everything from Apache seasonal migration patterns to the economic realities facing frontier settlements. Crawford proved more reasonable than Sarah had expected, but he also made clear that his orders came from territorial command and left little room for field discretion. "I can delay our advance for 48 hours while I send a dispatch requesting clarification," he finally offered. "But Miss Mackenzie, you should understand that associating yourself with Apache interests could complicate your family's business relationships with the territorial government." Sarah touched the necklace at her throat and thought about the week she'd spent learning to see the desert through Apache eyes. "Lieutenant, my family's business depends on peace in this territory. If that means being seen as someone who stands between two sides instead of firmly on one, then I suppose that's a risk worth taking." When she returned to the Apache camp with news of the delay, Sarah found the community preparing for a possible relocation deeper into the mountains. Naiche met her with an expression that mixed gratitude with resignation. "You have bought us time to move our elders and children to safety," he said. "For this, you will always be welcome among our people. But you should know that the soldiers will remember you as the woman who spoke for Apache interests. In their reports, you will be described as someone who cannot be fully trusted." As Sarah prepared for her journey back to Tucson, she realized that Naiche's words were both warning and prophecy. She would return to her family's trading business, but never again as simply a merchant's daughter. The necklace she wore marked her as someone who had crossed a line most settlers never approached, someone who had lived among the Apache and chosen to advocate for their perspective in the complex negotiations that would determine the future of the territory. The mark she carried was invisible to casual observers, but unmistakable to those who understood its significance. She had become something new in the frontier landscape, a bridge between worlds, trusted by neither side completely, but essential to both for the kind of peace that could only come through genuine understanding rather than simple victory.